detailed biomedical understanding of dementia. So what I'm going to talk to you about is more the broad picture about the nature of the public view of dementia. Because quite often we focus upon the individual with dementia, trying to manage the lives of individuals with dementia, trying to enhance the quality of their lives, but we forget about the broad public reaction, and that's the important thing to talk about in this Dementia Awareness Week. What is it about dementia that makes people so anxious? What is it that is happening in our society that when we mention the word dementia, people are horrified at the idea of getting dementia or having a family member with dementia? So what I thought I'd just briefly talk about is a report that came out this week from the Alzheimer's Society, which identified dementia as the most feared disease in Britain today. So what's so scary about the nature of dementia? And so they asked a few thousand people to answer a questionnaire in which they asked them, well, what is it about dementia that you're particularly anxious about? And the things that came up were, half of them thought that they would have to stop driving immediately. Once they were diagnosed, they would stop driving. 1 in 5 feared that they would lose their partner or their friends would stop talking to them. Nearly 60% of them thought it would mean that they'd never be able to talk to anybody again, they just couldn't participate in a conversation. And a half, and this is the important fact, a half thought that people would think they were mad. You've got dementia, therefore you've lost your marbles basically, and you can no longer participate actively in society. And in many ways, it's the modern version of the fear of cancer, which was very substantial in previous generations. I remember myself, I did a study of people's public perceptions of cancer. What do people think of cancer? The immediate thing when you mentioned cancer to people, particularly in the last generation, was it was a death sentence. Once you had cancer, it was all over. So what did you do about it then? Number one, if you had any doubts about cancer, you didn't go near the doctor because you were afraid of being diagnosed with cancer. Or if you had any treatment for cancer, you never mentioned it in conversation. Or if a family member had cancer, then you never mentioned it to anybody else because in case there was some sort of contagion, some sort of moral contagion of you with the other people. And in many ways, dementia is the same in the present climate. It's a sort of contemporary version of a disease which people don't want to talk about because they think it's something which is nasty and therefore let's not talk about it. Let's just move on. But still, thousands and thousands and thousands of people are diagnosed every year with dementia. So what do we do about this? Now the second thing I thought I'd mention is in the newspapers over the last week, there's been a lot of discussion about something else. And that is about public anxiety in general. People seem to be getting increasingly anxious about their lives. And so we conduct surveys and we get what's known in the psychology literature as generalized anxiety syndrome. People just seem to be nervous about everything. You know, the survey was, again, I provide surveys. A third of the population suffer from some form of social anxiety. Like I was talking to some of the speakers, I shouldn't mention this here, and they said anxiety about getting up in public to talk to people. But it's not just simply anxiety about getting up in public. It's anxiety about even talking to your neighbour over the garden fence in case they think bad of you. There's anxiety amongst teenagers, and we've got the whole epidemic of problems about depression, self-harm, anorexia, eating disorders, attention deficit disorders. All these things people get worried about, know that I'm not normal. And one of the things about this kind of generalized anxiety is that the expectation that we are all individuals, that we can handle our own problems, that we don't have to turn to anybody else for assistance, that it's all down to us that we're experiencing problems. And so, from a psychological perspective, what we always emphasize is that we're not individuals. We're all part of a community, a family, a broader society, and we all have to engage in support for each other. We're not individuals. But increasingly people are emphasizing that I feel guilty even asking for support, so I won't ask for support. So people who are, say, on disability or people who are growing older, when they're entitled to a variety of supports, quite often they don't ask for supports in case they feel like I'm a scrounger, I'm taking advantage of society, I can handle it myself. So when someone gets diagnosed with dementia, so again, the problem running around in their mind is, who do I turn to? I have nobody to turn to. There's no support available for me. And so I get anxious because I don't want to turn to anybody for support. And this is particularly the case amongst older people. Because when I turn to the last report I mentioned, is the issue of social isolation and loneliness amongst older people. And this, of course, goes along with the previous three things: dementia, anxiety. Loneliness is the third thing which we have to take in mind. Because particularly amongst older people, we have the issue of older people quite often living on their own. Their children have moved away, their loved one has died. Quite often, different people move into their neighbourhood, so there's nobody to talk to next door to them, or it's younger family who they don't have any kind of connection with. And so again, they have no social connections, and they report loneliness. So again, here are the figures. Over 50% of people over 75 years of age live on their own. 2/5 of older people say that television is their only form of social interaction. The television is their only company. 60% of people over the age of 50 who have been widowed and 50% who are separated feel lonely at some time or often. When you ask them in surveys, how do you feel? Over half the population over 50 say I have nobody to talk to. I feel lonely and socially isolated. And it goes on, but it's not just the experience of loneliness, but then there's, in statistical terms, the more lonely you feel, the less likely you are to draw upon social supports in your community, the less likely you are to avail of various formal services as well. So we've got these three things going hand in hand. We've got on the one hand this issue as regards increasing amount of dementia in the community. Secondly, we've got this issue about anxiety. I don't want to turn to anybody, and the pressure to be normal. Handle your own problems. Just deal with it yourself. Don't turn to us for support. And the third thing, this increasing number of socially isolated people. Now we know that dementia is a serious health hazard, and we know that it requires serious biomedical research to try to understand the biological process underlying it. One of equal importance, and not greater importance from my perspective, is the importance of both social and psychological research and social and psychological action. We're not talking about some magic cure for dementia. What we're talking about is changing public attitudes to dementia, as reflected in the dementia awareness, and also in trying to ensure that certain action is taken, not just for people who have dementia, but for their family members as well. It's estimated that roughly 800,000 people in Britain have dementia, and those numbers are going to increase. In the next 5 years, it'll be up to 1 million people across the country will have some form of dementia. And dementia isn't just a single disease, but it also can have a variety of mental health problems. There's personality disorders, there's mood swings, depression, other forms of anxiety, and as I said, it can have the ripple effect on family members as well. So looking to the future, what can we do about it? This is an important event because it's raising awareness, trying to challenge the myths that dementia is this form of madness and is constant deterioration. Secondly, it is how do we build up supports for family members and people with dementia. And then the last one is this broadly challenging this myth as well, that we always have to do something for ourselves, that we don't have to turn to other people for assistance. Rather, we should be turning to other people for assistance. You shouldn't be expected to handle it for yourself. So the first one is this myth that dementia is the end. As I said at the beginning, cancer was the end, dementia is the end of life. We know that dementia is a serious health problem, but there are many different forms of dementia. And of course it goes on a gradient. You know, people can have mild initial steps of dementia, and it's important that they can live as fully and active a life as possible. It's not just a life sentence which impacts you immediately. There's a range of people with dementia, and it can go through ups and downs. I was at a meeting recently where we had an Australian woman who had previously been quite a high civil servant in the Canadian government. And she was diagnosed with dementia in her 40s. And people thought this was the end of her career. But instead what she did was she turned herself into a dementia activist. And she goes around the world, she's published books on this here, she goes around the world advocating that people with dementia shouldn't be considered some people who are on the scrap heap, but rather people who can play a very active role in society. It's our job to actually ensure that they have those opportunities. The second thing is, of course, we challenge this whole idea that turning to people for assistance is wrong. As I said, people quite often have this attitude: if I'm experiencing certain minor symptoms, maybe if I'll ignore it, it'll go away. Well, the sooner as possible you get it diagnosed and get some sort of supports in place, the better, rather than ignoring it. So encouraging people to avail of the services which are around, advice on what to do about early signs, strategies of how do you manage it as it develops, and of course opportunities, the range of opportunities for people with dementia. Claire will be talking later on about the various activities across Stoke, but it's important to ensure that people with dementia don't feel lonely and isolated, but they can talk to other people with it and they can talk to their family members. I recall another study I did many years ago where I interviewed people who had been disabled in the workplace. And I went out and interviewed all these people in the workplace about the experience of having a disability, and they no longer could work. And these were mostly men who were absolutely dramatically impacted by not having a diagnosis. They were disabled. They couldn't do a lot of things. And so I thought, okay, I've done all these interviews. I'll analyse what they say, and then I thought I better invite them back so as to make sure that what I'm saying about them is accurate. And so I invited them back, and they weren't really interested in me at all. What they were interested in was meeting the other guys who had similar disabilities. And it's this opportunity to share your experience with others, to share your experience with other family members, is a very important process of actually managing a condition. And another one I had, again, because I did a lot of work earlier on different forms of cancer, was cancer support groups are quite well established now, because it gives people an opportunity to talk about it and to share the experience. It's not something which should be hidden, it's something which you can share the experience about. So ensuring that people have these opportunities, but also very important to ensure family members have the opportunities as well to actually engage in various forms of informal talk and support to ensure that people don't feel that they're on their own handling difficult situations. And then in a broader sense, to say that, yes, we are all part of society, we all have our rights in society, we all want to achieve different things in society, but it's a completely right that we should be able to turn to others, and also that we should expect the state to provide appropriate services for people in need. It's not something we can expect that because people have worked hard all their lives and then they have particular health problems, that they then should be ignored. People have certain rights, and we should ensure that they have access to appropriate services and supports. So today is an important day because it's beginning to challenge that stigma around dementia, that it's something which is completely an indicator of madness. Rather, it's something which affects a large proportion of our society. And in some ways, I was talking to a colleague today, she was saying in some ways it's become the new normal, because so many people have it. And so what we have to do, rather than simply ignoring it, say this is a new form of living. Basically, it causes a lot of challenges, but how do we ensure that people who have various talents and abilities have the opportunity of engaging fully in society, and how do we ensure that we give them appropriate supports, and the family have appropriate supports as well. So I'm looking forward to the film, and hopefully we'll have some discussion later on about some of the ideas which I've raised.